You are listening to a Clarkesworld Magazine podcast. I'm your host and narrator, Kate Baker. Welcome to the first story for the month of December. You almost made it. It's almost been another year. And it's been another year of your support. It's been a year of you coming to the podcast and listening to yet another story, another world built by yet another author. And you know how we're able to do that each and every month? That is with your generous support. So thank you if you've been subscribing, if you've gone to patreon.com/Clarkesworld, if you've told a friend about the story that you really liked, if you've chucked a few bucks our way via donation. We simply cannot do this without you. Our first story is titled Tomorrow, Today, and is by R.T. Ester. R.T. Ester lives just outside Dallas, Texas, where he works full-time as a graphic designer and spends his off hours raising 3 young kids with his wife. In his spare time, he writes speculative fiction and has had stories published in Interzone and Clarkesworld. His debut novel, The Ganymedean, is out now from Solaris Books. And if you like what you hear, we've got a few stories from R.T. Ester that you should go back and have a listen to. Sleeper, which was featured in August 2025. Rake the Leaves, April 2023. Anais Gets a Turn, January 2023. Slight Forms, August 2022. And Meddling Fields in March of 2022. So, my dear listener, I hope that you can sit back, relax, and let me tell you a story. When he came home from the resource center, Mark removed his tote bag filled with binders and set it next to Malcolm's book bag on the floor. Malcolm was old enough to be home by himself now, but the ability to work longer hours at the center meant Mark was often home after the child had gone to sleep. Tonight, the floor seemed suited to more than just his tote bag. Oh, he was tired. The trek from the parlor to his bedroom felt like it would take him an eternity, so he collapsed on the couch instead. The last 4 years had been a lot better than he expected. In the morning, he would take Malcolm to the clinic again and hope for the best. A Sanford and Son rerun played as he went to sleep, and the light from the video wall bathed his aching body and the couch under it in a hazy white gloss. He didn't hear the volume come down after a while, but sensed Malcolm standing in front of him. When he opened his eyes, the light from the lamp beside the couch was back on, and Malcolm was blocking his view with a photograph taken the last time they visited the clinic. "Who's that?" The question jolted him fully awake. He had to squint to be sure, but it was a photo of Malcolm taken 4 years earlier. Sitting up, he hunched forward and rubbed his eyes. That's you. The day after you turned 12, Malcolm." Malcolm, flipping the photo around, held it up to his thin face and furrowed his brow. "I look the same age as him." Mark nodded and almost sighed at first, but remembering how Malcolm had looked on their way home that morning, he held his hand out for the photo instead. "As you," he said. Malcolm released the photo and shook his head. "I don't look 12, Mark." The photo had been taken as they got ready to leave the clinic. Malcolm had been lowered into a wheelchair, and Mark was wheeling him out through the entrance, when one of the techs remembered they always took a photo afterward and rushed up from behind them. Malcolm looked wet and sleepy-eyed as the anesthesia wore off. He barely knew where he was. "You also don't look 12 here," Mark said, gazing down at his own smile in the photograph as it hovered above Malcolm's drooping stare. "But you did look your age at some point." He pinched the photo between his index and middle fingers, handing it back. "Why are we looking at this photo, Malcolm?" he asked. "And going over this now. Again. Tomorrow was almost here. Reconsidering?" Malcolm sniffed as he slid the photo into the pocket of his gym shorts. "No, I'm ready," he said, growling the words out. "I just wanted you to see this photo of me I found under the fridge." "Yes." Mark slapped the couch and his eyes rounded restrainedly at Malcolm. "Of you." "Oh, just stop." Malcolm looked away. "Got it," Mark said, throwing his hands guardedly up before resting them on his knees. "Tomorrow?" Without a word back, Malcolm dragged toward the hallway on his right. They'd been over this more times than just this evening, but the photo's inclusion was new. In the morning, he would likely have changed his mind. It was fully up to him now, either way. "Yeah, Dad, I'm ready," he finally replied from the hallway. "Like I said." After the exchange, Mark had wanted to stay awake. Malcolm could sleep through the loudest storm outside his window, but tonight Mark sensed his son's insomnia from his end of the hallway. 4 years back, Malcolm slept soundly the night before. When Mark had poked his head through Malcolm's bedroom door that night, Malcolm looked small for a 12-year-old, reminding Mark of the child's many other struggles to adjust. But he was still here. What mattered then, as it did now, was that Malcolm was still here. The creak of the apartment's front door woke Mark again. While he stared at the opening credits to an obscure 80s anime playing on mute in front of him, his phone groaned with a notification about his car downstairs. Malcolm had taken it, without asking, again. Mark sighed but stayed on the couch, giving his son some needed space. The next time his phone buzzed, it told him where the car was now parked. After a brief bout of indecision, he reconsidered and grabbed his coat from the closet by the door. The maglev from the station near his apartment to the city's outskirts took about an hour, and the whole way there, the ride was quiet and serene, and the stark color of night pervaded through the windows. New moon. This place was never as new as when he took the trains at night. He completed the trip using a rideshare. He'd changed his mind after he thought about the photo, and it dawned that before tonight, Malcolm had never actually seen his current body the way it looked on his first day inside it. The photo went missing from the fridge before he was able to walk and enter the kitchen again. In it, he looked unnaturally burnished, resembling candle wax in the shape of a gangly 9th grader. The car was parked under the cover of trees on a hill that overlooked rooftops below and gave a breathtaking view of the city as it stayed awake. Awake, but quiet from up here. When Mark joined Malcolm on the hood, the boy didn't turn from the view, knees drawn up, hands around his ankles. "Your body doesn't age physically, Malcolm," he said, "if that's what this is still about. And if you're nervous about tomorrow, you still have 2 years with this one." "Today," Malcolm said, almost hummed under his breath. "What?" "Today," he repeated. His back was arched over his knees and the knots in his spine poked through his oversized t-shirt. "It's today." Taking note of the time, Mark leaned back on his elbows and laughed inwardly at himself. "That's right. It was way past midnight." "I couldn't sleep," Malcolm said. "And I was actually trying to stay awake. Sorry. This was easier when you were younger. The clinic recommended sleep the night before." "When I hadn't turned 12? He sniffed. There was hope he would say what was actually on his mind now that he'd seen the photo of himself that fell from the fridge door. The photo could have been found sooner if Mark hadn't grown tired of seeing it every time he entered the kitchen. It had begun reminding him of doubts he had early on about this endeavor that could last for as long as Malcolm was willing to accept its premise as he got older. In the photo, Malcolm resembled the child beside him now, but for nearly a week after they returned from the clinic, he was stiff and robotic, dark brown skin textured like vinyl as his new body adjusted to conditions outside the lab that previously held it. His memories had taken longer to resurface. For those first few weeks, it was often like living with a guest who needed constant help finding where the blender and other things in the apartment were. "What if I wanted to stay this age forever?" Malcolm asked, breaking a silence that lingered almost half a minute. "Is that even possible?" Mark cleared his throat and had to remind himself to just answer the question. The bodies didn't age outwardly, but after a period of time, they all began to lose their internal functions and had to be replaced. Each new body had to broadly accommodate the patient's age range and stage of development. They were often recycled as a part of a program to lower operational expenses at the clinic. "You're at the age now when you're expected to make this decision yourself, Malcolm," he said. "In about 2 years, when this one starts to break down on you, if you decide you still want to keep it, You can. Yes, it's possible. I don't advise it, but yes. And you're sure I'll still be Malcolm? The question drove a nail through Mark's attempt to enjoy the view. No, like, after today, you're sure? Because I'm not. I don't know if it's what you want to hear right now, Mark, but I think whoever you brought home from the hospital 14 years ago, I think he actually died when his heart stopped. Just a bad copy of his brain on a server. Mark swallowed and pushed through his own doubts as they resurfaced, becoming a torment the more he tried to ward them off. Malcolm, if you keep talking like that, I'll have to conclude you're not actually ready. I already said I was. Then why does it sound like we haven't already been over this? You're my son. You're Malcolm. When you were born, they gave you 2 years, but thanks to the kindness of donors who wanted better things for you, we were able to move here. And now you're almost old enough to be on your own, in this place where a lot of things still work the way they should. You're my son. You don't always have to believe it. But if you're sounding like this just a few hours before, now I know you believe it, but is it actually true? Mark gulped and looked away. On his right, the view was of ferries on a lake they frequented when Malcolm was younger, walking its harbor, sitting to eat outside while they people-watched. And Mark eavesdropped on banter in a language he barely understood. Back then, he often had to break Malcolm's once-a-day maintenance pills into his meals. Malcolm handled that himself now. Under the lights from the harbor, the ferries on the lake looked surreal this early morning, like miniatures as they waded past each other, and night crawlers mingled from one deck to the next. A festive crowd. Mark got his phone out. He hadn't done this in a while, and the last time, he had been wanting to convince just himself. He swiped. When he arrived at a photo of Malcolm, he held the phone out so the child could see. This was before you turned 5. On the screen, a boy of that age was sitting with Mark on a bench, and the lake volleyed a reflection of sunlight behind them. Malcolm turned his head rigidly and stared. His face was different now from what anyone would have guessed back then. The boy had a dip in his chin that his current body didn't have. Mark swiped a few more times and stopped. 5 to 8, he said. On the screen, Malcolm was in a school uniform with other kids, and they were posing on a wall with their teacher. He stood shorter than his classmates by a lot. You were a small, 8-year-old. He was also round-faced in the photo, unlike now. In the next one, he wore a helmet he had just removed from its packaging, and his round face resembled a toddler's inside it. Remember this? Mark nudged the phone toward Malcolm. That afternoon, he'd gotten more than he had expected to come with their own kids. Malcolm looked away from his old body. On my 8th birthday. You actually managed to hurt yourself that afternoon. You remember that, don't you? Yeah, I remember. He nodded limply. Looking down, he lowered one of his knees a little and palmed the spot beside it, where the body in the photo hit a sidewalk that later produced a bump from falling off the bike that came with the helmet. Barely. That's normal, Mark said, lowering the phone to his side. That was almost 10 years ago. I barely remember what I had for lunch yesterday. Malcolm looked up again and sighed deeply at the view in front of him, hugging his knees. Mark followed his gaze. Together, they observed a silence that absorbed the urgency of the moment and its completeness. Complete stillness between the two as a light gale drifted across the hill, and Mark remembered coming up here by himself as well. Very infrequently, he came here and looked down and wondered what his life would be like if he'd second-guessed the initial scanning and upload procedure. If they'd stayed home. A small college town in the southwest region of the States. 8 to 12. His phone was not in front of him again, and he was swiping past images of skating rinks and mountain reserves and water parks they'd visited together. When he found 8 to 12, he'd nudged the phone forward again. 8 to 12 had been awkward most of the time, but his imagination got him through the worst of those years. In the photo, the scar the body came with was prominent above his right eye, a line trailing at a slight angle toward his scalp. You wanted everyone to call you Dagger, so the whole time, we all just called you Dagger. Remember that? Shaking his head, Malcolm looked away, and Mark chortled under his breath. I think you do, Malcolm, he said. You're just a little embarrassed by it, now that you're older. He shook his son playfully by the shoulder. He brought his voice low, and when he was sure it would sound enough like a snarling Bond villain voice, he dragged the name out slowly. Dagger. All right, stop. Malcolm made a weak backward motion with his forearm. All right. When he was able to stop snickering, Mark leaned back and sighed. It's nice up here. It's not always easy to see how much this place has changed over the years, but up here, it's right in front of you. He reflected on his decision to come here from the apartment. Before that, he assumed they already talked enough about this. Today was here. In a few hours, Malcolm would be saying his goodbyes to 12 to 16. But he didn't have to. He could keep the body for another 2 years. Longer if he wanted. Whatever you decide, Malcolm, Mark said. You came from me. You're my son. If there was more he could say, he'd said it before, but he should have expected this. Malcolm was older now, and something like this would be no less difficult for anyone else his age. Mark huffed under his breath. The view was epiphanous, but he wanted to rest his eyes first. In a few hours, maybe in 2 years, he would welcome and look after the next iteration of Malcolm. Hopefully better than he did the last one. What are your thoughts on the story? You can send me an email. I'm kate@clarkesworldmagazine.com. We have a bunch more stories left for you for this holiday season, so as you're rushing about, doing all of the things, pop us on. Listen to another author, brought to you by your support. Thank you. I do hope you'll come back, should you so choose. And until then, my dear listener, I bid you a very fond and hopefully very temporary farewell.